Hi, I am Jeffrey Wernick, and here again for it's Monday, so it's the Fine Print with Bruce and Dennis. Um, we uh, we hope that Ryan will be able to join us later. We're not sure, but at least we have Dennis and Bruce, and so we'll get started. Bruce, I call this one Bruce's Choice. You
Yeah.
know, we just have so much to talk about, uh, and there's so much raw material. Why don't you get us started, Bruce?
Well, I think the fixation really right now is on the brutality, the constitutional lawlessness of ICE out in Minnesota, Minneapolis in particular. The disclosures that uh, their ICE is being advised that there need to be no judicial warrant to enter homes. Um, the obvious video evidence that there are at least two murders out in Minneapolis of U.S. citizens never suspected of being here without authorization. And the at least initial opposition of the federal government, or at least Mr. Trump and ICE and DHS, to even investigate the murders. It is a very complicated legal terrain here. Under the Supremacy Clause of the Constitution, in general, state authorities cannot investigate and prosecute a federal official for committing state crime if the challenged conduct was within the outer perimeter of the federal official's official duties. It goes back to an 1890 case called In re Nagel. But here, the argument is being made that it is not an official duty when it's not even plausible self-defense, to use lethal force against citizens, even if you believe that they are protesting, the enforcement of the immigration laws, or at least the methods. So I believe we're going to be running into a standoff between the state prosecutors and the federal government. It's kind of ironic. I guess it shows you how far we've come. That in my lifetime, the initial uses of federal officials and utilizing the supremacy clause was in conjunction with federal officers who were enforcing the non-discrimination provisions of the Constitution and laws in the South, and they would oftentimes have trumped up charges brought against them, and the supremacy clause was necessary to bring fruition to the Civil War amendments and the civil rights laws. But here we have the inverse. It's thought that state governments typically were going to be less sympathetic to the Constitution and federal laws than the federal government. But now we find the states, certainly Minnesota, more avid to enforce the Constitution than the federal government is. So I think we really are confronting, an inflection point. Mr. Trump and the government continues to push and push and push. When there's some pushback, they back away a little, but they don't renounce their argument that they can do anything they want without any restraint of the Constitution, including what I consider murder, and be absolved from prosecution under state law. I do not think it's kind of like Abe Lincoln said, a country can't be half slave and half free. We can't be half law abiding and half lawlessness. It's simply not going to operate that way, and it can't. And so it's now time for the citizens and the Congress and we, the people, to push back against this effort to completely destroy the handiwork of July 4th, 1776. It is truly astonishing that a president of the United States, without any embarrassment, would boast to the New York Times, to be broadcast to the whole world, I can do anything I want as president. And the only thing that restrains me is my own individual, idiosyncratic moral conscience, which means he can do anything he wants. We're also dealing with someone who's very erratic. When he's claims that he's going to take Greenland over one way or another, no matter whether there's consent of the Greenlanders or Denmark. Then the next day he backs away. He on one day says that in Afghanistan only Americans died, the Danes and the British did not. Then the next day he praises them. So this is the kind of erratic behavior that's rather alarming when we think this individual has the ability basically to destroy the entire world for some narcissistic reason, dropping bomb. It could be a bomb one day, it could be in Caracas, the next day it could be in Beijing, the next day it could be in Moscow. Nobody knows because there isn't any strategy, rhyme, or reason behind this president. I think we're also looking at another disaster, calamity, Vietnam War like in Venezuela. I don't think the president has any idea what we're supposed to do there. They don't have any plans for election. We say that we're going to plan the budget without any congressional appropriations. This is coming to a head. And I know from at least the optimistic, from my angle, having been up on the Hill regularly, and maybe Dennis more than me, I do think now Congress is starting to awaken to the peril of this country as being free.
Dennis, I have some questions for you, but I'd like to set something up prior to asking you two specific questions.
Sure.
One, I think with the issue with respect to consent, I think Trump has already demonstrated that he doesn't believe in the concept of consent. He'll do what he wants until there's enough force against his force that will cause him to back down. But as far as him, he's already established the fact that he doesn't really, the concept of consent is he only respects power. So he'll do whatever he can do until a countervailing force that's even stronger than him responds to his. So I think he's generally shown that that's his form of governance. I think also, with respect to now the point questions I want to ask Dennis. Okay, Dennis, you've worn numerous hats in your life. One of them has been mayor of a city, and another has been a member of Congress. So I've kind of asserted that my position is, and you're an independent, so you're not going to look at it from a Democratic prism or a Republican prism. You're someone who thinks for yourself, okay? And so you come up with, which is one of the reasons why I respect you so much, that you take everything from a very independent point of view. So it's you're not just reciting and regurgitating a party line. You're always reflecting your true, honest beliefs. So, which is a rare quality. So, I mean, my opinion is that the Democrats should just say no budget until ICE is out of Minneapolis. So I wouldn't even discuss with Trump, until they left, Minnesota and every place else they did. I said, you withdraw and then we'll talk. So, but I could be wrong. I'm just saying that's what I would do. So now putting yourself in two different perspectives. If you were in the House, what would you be trying to convince your colleagues needed to be done by the House? And if you were the mayor, as you have been a mayor, what would you be doing as mayor? What actions would you take as mayor, since you've already been in the position of being a mayor? So you have a perspective that neither, Bruce or I can add anything to. So it's unique to you. And so I'd like to hear, your point of view on both of those aspects.
Yeah. First of all, based on their lawlessness, their total ignorance of the Constitution and refusal to abide by any principles of the Constitution, ICE has to be abolished, period. Now, how do you do that? You strike them from the budget. This is Congress's power. This is always Congress's power. Congress can stop wars, invasions, attacks by simply striking the money. And this is what should happen. Given the gravity of the situation, I'd shut down the whole House until you got rid of ICE, period, and see how long they want to go. Because right now it is the governance of America. It is the the deeply held belief in a republic or democracy, depending on what your politics are, that anchors America in a sense of unity. But that's being shattered. It's being shattered uh, by an organization which has been given license to attack American citizens in the name of enforcing immigration law, to become uh, police, prosecutor, judge, jury, and executioner in a matter of seconds, to be able to exert a type of conduct on the streets that's very similar to what stormtroopers did in early Germany, in pre-World War II Germany. So, that's the first thing. As a congressman, I would be there advocating that ICE be abolished and it be defunded, and to take a stand on that, not to, not to tinker with what has proven to be a broken system, of which there's no control. Congress has to take action and has to stop this, and the only way to do it is to stop the funding. Now, the second thing, had I been mayor, the police would be instructed not to participate with anything that ICE does, and if they see a citizen being assaulted by ICE, to arrest that ICE personnel. It can't be tolerated. Now, would we be headed to federal courts? Sure. It all depends on the district, as we know. But my feeling is that there are deep 10th Amendment rights here that have not been effectively asserted, and that the Supremacy Clause, which is a constitutional provision, if it is to stand, then all the other constitutional provisions have to stand too. But once you destroy the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, the 14th Amendment, at least to begin with, don't come to the court and argue Supremacy Clause, because frankly, you vitiated the Constitution. And at this point, states, the 10th Amendment becomes most salient. Now, I think we have to look at this. Let's change a prism here on our camera on what we're looking at these events. This emergence of 3 million Epstein files being released, with another 3 million not released, is absolutely putting greater pressure on the administration and on the president in particular. And, I think that's going to affect, it could affect the movement of the president with respect to Iran, because of his personal vulnerabilities. And I think we're looking at one of the most precarious moments in the modern history of the United States and of the world. As Bruce said, the implications of this are global. And the president prides himself on not being restrained. And we're moving into a position where apparently anything goes. And when you look at the implication of some of the just released Epstein files, I don't know about you or anybody watching, seldom do, spending a lifetime in politics, I've never changed my moral compass. And I have to tell you, it is morally offensive to the limit of what should be acceptable in conduct in a civilized society. And I'm not a goody two shoes by any means, but I will tell you, I just find what's happening. The more revelations there are about Epstein, the more possibilities that rise about a cover-up. I've had it up to here, and I'm sure that many Americans have as well, because the one thing, we can have leaders that we disagree with, but when we have leaders who are so morally compromised that it affects that it infiltrates into every single decision that they make. Somebody's got to blow the whistle and call the cops. In this case, it's Congress that has to do its job and demand that everything be released, all the redactions be removed, and let it all out in the open so the American people can have the benefit of the disinfectant of sunshine.
Yeah. I make an observation. Number one, the Supreme Court has been quite clear that states cannot be commandeered by the federal government to enforce the immigration laws or any other federal law. It's up to the state to decide whether they want to join with the federal forces or to say removed or aloof. So there's no obligation for Minneapolis or St. Paul or Minnesota to cooperate. It's up to the state. The second thing I'd observe about the transparency importance here, there's staggering amount of redactions based upon national security, right? State secrets. You have to ask yourself, what connection would have adults sleeping with underage women? How would that connect to national security unless, if this has unless there was some connection to a foreign government, maybe Israel, because we know that Epstein was close to Robert Maxwell, who was very, very close to Israel, maybe a foreign agent.
And Barack.
Yeah, I mean, that's for sure. So you have to wonder what these redactions really are concealing. But I do agree with Dennis. It's another effort by Mr. Trump to cause distractions by raising the temperature in other ways. It was really quite alarming that over the weekend at the Alfalfa Club here in Washington, D.C., Trump was just joking about, well, he's dropped a bomb. He's going to take a break there and watch, the bombs fall on Tehran or on Greenland or something like that. I mean, really? You're joking about nuclear destruction and possibly omnicide? He didn't get a very warm welcome, but that's the kind of individual we're dealing with. And I believe that he is so narcissistic, we cannot even trust his minimal and non-existent moral scruples to prevent him from bringing the whole world in the United States down with him if he doesn't get his way. Now, that's the kind of risk that we should never take, even if the risk is only 5%. This isn't the White House. And that's why we have impeachment. It was viewed as a surrogate for tyrannicide, and it was prophylactic. It was like firing the CEO. I don't believe that anybody who's been cognizant ever since January 20th, cannot believe that we confront an imminent peril. Any day we could credibly believe, we read the headlines, Trump attacks one day Nigeria, Venezuela the next day, Greenland the next day, could be Canada the next day. He's very angry at Canada. Then he maybe attacks Norway because it didn't award him the Nobel Peace Prize. All these things are plausible. And they're going to set off a chain of events, I think, somewhat like the killing of Archduke Ferdinand in Sarajevo that set off World War I. And then it kind of got out of control. Why are we accepting that risk, as Americans? And that's why Congress really needs to step up to the plate, just for our own safety's sake, even the Congress's safety's sake. The President of the United States has basically told Congress, you are wallpaper. I don't ever have to talk to you about anything, and I'm not going to.
Let me add to this. As somebody who served 16 years in the House, I worked with both sides of the aisle. Didn't mean I voted with both sides of the aisle, but I worked with both sides. Republican office holders right now in Congress, whether in the House or the Senate, they're looking at the tea leaves. This state Senate election in Texas that Trump carried by 11 points in the last election, suddenly swung Democrat by 15 points, a 26-point swing. There's, politicians pay attention to that. They're kind of like birds on a wire. You might see one bird alight and then 2, 3, 4. Let me tell you something. Marjorie Taylor Greene was that first bird, Tom Massey first or second. And all of a sudden, people are starting to pay attention to the totality of what's happening. You're seeing senators like Tom Tillis, who's not running again, but he's been bitterly acerbic about the administration's attention. Now, where's intention? So where does this lead? The president is losing support in the House and will continue to hemorrhage support because of his erratic behavior. The more that's released, and particularly these Epstein files, and particularly with women in Congress, Republican women, the more that's released, more difficult it is for people to hold on in support of the president. And I don't think I'm certainly not the first one to say it, but there's enough evidence out there that the Democrats will retake the House. Now, well, I'm not sure it's going to matter in terms of macro policy in the United States. It certainly is going to affect Donald Trump. The question is, if senators feel threatened because of Trump, he could face something that he can't even imagine. It could happen before 2026, but let's say it doesn't. If the Republicans have a backlash because of Trump in 2026, which they will in the House and may in the Senate, I would predict that you will see an impeachment. That when I drafted my articles of impeachment against Bush, I think we got up to about over 60, and then I trimmed it down to about 46 or so. There's so much kindling wood for a fire here about the Constitution being wrecked, and so I think that the Republican Party is being shattered. Trump's hold on the Congress is slipping. It will be reflected in this next election, and impeachment may be the least of his worries by the time you get to the next Congress.
Yeah,
I'd like to interject here. Epstein, I'll comment a little later on, but I had one thing I wanted to posit for Bruce. Okay, Dennis is mayor of the city. Dennis hires somebody and you certainly have the qualifications to be a Supreme Court justice. So now imagine yourself that you actually have been nominated and approved, and you're sitting on the Supreme Court. So here you have Dennis coming up and saying, "This is my city. People voted me to protect them. I don't let any murderers, I don't care what uniform they wear. I have the responsibility of protecting my own citizens, and I'm going to protect my own citizens from murderers. So I'm taking these people who murdered and assassinated. We think the evidence exists, and we're going to try them." Then you have Pamela Bondi come up and tell you, "Hey, Bruce, we're supreme, okay? We're supreme. These people have absolute immunity. So if they murder people, national security, okay? So we're supreme. We're protecting the nation. It's not reviewable by anyone other than ourselves, okay? And because I think that's the type of argument they would make. We're supreme, and this is national security issues. So our border and everything, national security issues, and these people have immunity from the actions they take because they're official acts. So you listen to these cases, okay? Which side do you come out on listening to, these cases?
I think what I would do is say, if you take, the lead case here in Ray Nagel, that was where it was undisputed that Nagel, who was charged with murder by California, was acting in self-defense of someone who was attacking Supreme Court Justice Stephen J. Field. It is obvious that he was doing his duty. And in that circumstance, there was immunity because the California was harassing him. Stephen J. Field was a very controversial political figure in California, but Nagel needs to be confined to its facts. In this case, because we're talking about particular cases, it's obvious that the ICE persons who Minnesota wants to prosecute, there's no way plausibly that they're acting in self-defense. In fact, they are the aggressors. In one case, that actually removed a gun that was properly and legally owned and possessed before they shot him on several occasions. Renee Good was driving away from ICE. And so I'd say Nagel needs to be confined to its facts. And in these circumstances where there isn't any argument that self-defense was at work, the state of Minnesota can move forward. I would underscore, of course, that these federal officials still have all the rights that any other defendant has under due process and the Constitution. Minnesota still needs to prove beyond a reasonable doubt the elements of the crime charged, and they'll have a right of confrontation, right of counsel, and everything else, including a requirement of a jury verdict that's unanimous. And that's how I would play it. Remember, the idea behind the Constitution, not only at the federal level where you have the three branches of government checking each other, but the federal-state divide is also there. The federalism component is further provide a dispersal of power to check any abuses. And in this circumstance, the conclusion to check abuses is to authorize the states to move forward when the facts are as presented in this case. That's how I would answer.
There's something that that you just said, Bruce, that that we need to remember, and that is that there is no tolling of a statute when murder is committed.
Yeah.
That it can always be prosecuted. So those in ICE who feel that they can shoot someone with impunity or assault in a particular, they need to know that a change in administration is going to, will be coming. And when a change of administration happens, this is going to be one of the issues in the election, period. Are you going to prosecute these people who shot two people who were not resisting and who were basically, innocent, who were innocent people? And how many more between now and then are going to suffer that? I mean, there's been others who have died at the hands of ICE, to be sure, and they must not be forgotten. But I think that there is going to be a comeuppance, and it is not. This is not going to go away. And if
I could add, I believe the other check here that's at work, the state prosecution is beyond President Trump's ability to pardon.
Right.
So it's another reason, it's another check, if you will, on limitless power. We know that Trump is not going to do anything to discipline, demote anyone. It may send them to a different discotheque or something like Bovino from removing from Minnesota because he's not playing well on TV. But he's not going to prosecute. So this is another instance where checks and balances are all in favor of the states having authority.
Yeah, if justice denied is justice deferred is justice denied, there will be justice on these matters. And, despite the attempt to keep deferring it, it's not going to go away. And I would say because they haven't addressed it, and speaking from a political standpoint now, the best thing they could have done is to immediately address it and cause a plea and be done with it. But they didn't do that. They've elongated this. And so they've made it more of an issue. And it's not just more of an issue with respect to the legal consequences of what they're doing here as an administration, but it has political implications.
Yeah.
There are hundreds of thousands of people, maybe millions of people collectively around America who are marching now because of this injustice, because of these murders, because of ICE's impunity. And this is going to be one of the issues. Well, it may not be the issue because let's face it, people who are worried about making it day to day, and don't know where their next meal is coming from. They have other concerns. But this is part of that entire corrupt structure of governance gone awry that is going to be a factor in the mounting turnout to change the government of the country, because they haven't dealt with it, and they're not going to, because
and I want to underscore as well to what Dennis has said. It's not just the murders of the two citizens, it's the ramifications. Basically, those murders going unpunished are terrifying the local population. The people are living in crouches. They don't even want to go outside. It's like they're under house arrest. So it isn't just the two who've been impacted. The entire country has been impacted. People feel insecure walking outside, and that's outrageous. I mean, are we living, on Tiananmen Square, on Red Square? No, that's not why we became a country in 1776. That's why I keep going. This is the counter-revolution against the handiwork of 1776.
Yeah, this is the point I was trying to get to with my questions. My questions were sequential because I'm trying to go exactly that way, and this is why I want to get the Supreme Court involved. And so, yes, this issue is more than, the people murdered, assassinated, whatever word people think is appropriate, they deserve justice. So, but you're right, there are other victims. The victims are all right now, to the extent that if these two people don't get their justice, nobody else should have an expectation that they also will receive justice. And so they will do, Bruce, exactly what you just said. They will now think that there's an armed force, okay, that can just shoot anyone they want for any reason they want to give, and know that they can do that, and they have absolute immunity for these acts. So if the people see that, anytime you see an ICE agent, if you look at them the wrong way, you might feel that they're just going to shoot you, and and ask questions later. Then the question is, going into the back, so if I was mayor, which I would never want to be, I would think that what I would want to do is, I would, try and gather as much evidence as I could. If the federal government refuses to give me evidence that I can't do, I would subpoena them, and then I would go to the courts, and ultimately the Supreme Court will have to make a decision on where it stands. Is the Supreme Court going to establish a precedent that presidents can have their own private army that can go and kill people and decides they're going to allow the deputizing a whole bunch of people who have absolute immunity, to kill, and the killing is not subject to any sort of review, and then say this is a constitutional concept because this is what James Madison wanted. So, or they're going to sit back and say, this is really absurd. What we don't want to have is a principle where any president can go out, hire a bunch of agents and say, don't worry, if you feel threatened, whatever, if you don't like the way somebody looked at you, you don't like they spit at you, shoot them and don't worry, we got your back. So
this is why what you just said, Jeffrey, this is why Congress has to abolish ICE, because they can act with impunity, and with the president that we have right now, he could just issue a plenary pardon like he did on January 6th, at the end of his term, and say, don't worry about it. I mean, that then brings into greater question the constitutionality of the pardon. Can you pardon somebody for committing murder? And with the president having famously said that he could shoot someone in the middle of Fifth Avenue and get away with it, and that, as you pointed out, the laws, his interpretation of law is what he thinks, not what the structure of the law is. Then we are in a position where only Congress can do something now, and that Congress must act. ICE must be abolished. You can't say, well, let them use cameras, make them require cameras. Like that's going to matter. You had video cameras of independent people surrounding a circumference of videos of what happened when a plain murder was committed against, upon Alex Preddy, and when murder of Renee Good occurred, what does that mean? When we know that the very department that is supposed to be responsible here will use AI to try to change the appearance of somebody who's just been arrested to make them look like they have a degree of angst, which they didn't have in the case of this one woman. I look at that and I say, no, this has gone too far. When is enough enough? And if enough isn't enough now, how much more are we going to have to see as a country before there is a response? We're setting up a moment that the consequences of mass action could produce a tragedy of great proportions here.
I think
great
that one, you could start out first with regard to the pardon power. Again, it all goes back to Congress. James Madison at the Virginia Ratification Convention said to George Mason, well, listen, if the president abuses his pardon power by sheltering political friends or personal friends, of course, Congress will impeach and remove the president, right? It goes back, Congress, if Congress is not doing its job, the Constitution is largely a scrap of paper. There's so many difficulties in getting into court that Congress has to pick up the slack, and it was intended to pick up the slack. And I say, if they did it once, they wouldn't have to do it again for 100 years. The second thing I'd observe is, the discussion that we have, it goes back, I think, to last week when we talked about the absurdity of immunities, government immunities, official immunities. No, if you are in government or the government itself, you're least entitled to immunity because you have the monopoly of legalized violence and money. And it's more obligatory on the government, which is constrained by the Constitution, to turn square corners than the private citizen. This idea that, inherent, and remember, it goes back to Madison, justice is the end of civil society, end of government. How can immunities exist? It's utterly ridiculous. You can't sue the government. You can't sue, government officials. They should be strictly liable. We want to have them steer clear of the lime on the edge of the football field. We don't want you to go near that. We want to we give breathing space to our constitutional rights. And that's something that really has to change it needs to be changed in our legal and jurisprudential culture. This idea of government immunity, unless it consents to be sued, it can trample over all of your constitutional rights. I mean, right now, for example, the ICE agents can collect information illegally and use it in deportation proceedings. Really? So you profit by your own criminality? This is utterly ridiculous.
Well, you can go from ICE to just the general conduct of an administration, which is using the Department of Justice to punish enemies of the perceived enemies of the administration. I mean,
yeah, exactly. It's instead of faithfully executing the laws, they're faithfully sabotaging the laws. Is what they're doing here, and they know they have. Like the absurd claims that Jacob Frey, the mayor of Minneapolis, or Tim Walz, the governor, somehow they're guilty of crimes because they're urging ICE to obey the law and urging people to exercise their First Amendment rights of free speech and association and petitioning for redress of grievances. I mean, the whole thing is absurd. I mean, this is truly like a justice in China and Russia, where defense attorneys get prosecuted for defending the law. And that's the theories they have. Of course, they're losing overwhelmingly in the courts, a handful in the Supreme Court, but that numbers are not great. And they appoint people illegally, be the interim U.S. attorneys. But that's what this government, the Trump administration, is aiming at. I don't even think you need, in some sense, trials where the evidence is open and notorious in plain view. Congress, in my judgment, could vote today to impeach Kristi Noem and Pam Bondi, at least, for flouting their obligations under the Constitution. They took an oath to support and defend. It's not even a close call. Now, Dennis, we remember Watergate. I mean, the Watergate crimes compared to what we're seeing every day today are like jaywalking, compared to first-degree murder. This is ridiculous.
Yeah, really.
Yeah, I think that with respect to what you said, Bruce, I think the Constitution, there was a constitutional convention. The Constitutional Convention came out with who they believed and under what conditions should have the privilege of having an immunity. They defined it pretty clearly in the Constitution of who and under what circumstances, and anyone not included that was not enumerated should have assumed that they had no immunity. So every other immunity granted is just pure fiction. So and the perverse aspect about this administration, but it's probably not unique to this administration, but at least what they're doing, with as much of a broadened application of immunity to their preferred people they want to give immunity to, they're still prosecuting a woman who went to, who was a congresswoman who went to visit a facility. You could say that certainly was their official act, them monitoring that they have the right to do, and they prosecuted that person. So they seem to have as broad a definition as they have of immunity to their friends. They have a very narrow or non-existent immunity to anyone that are not their friends, and those are people who have immunities that seem to be described in the Constitution. I don't know how they've manufactured the fact that this is not an official act.
Yeah, I would add, Jeffrey, there's a statute that prohibits ICE, prohibits the executive branch from blocking members of Congress from observing detention facilities for immigrants, precisely so they can exercise their oversight power, which is protected by the speech or debate clause, in Article 1. And notwithstanding that, they're trying to say, I think Pam Bonnie's ladies, you got to give us, at least 7 days notice so we can build a Potemkin village better than Potemkin could, to make everything look good for the 5 seconds you're in it. And then we'll go back to square one and violate the Eighth Amendment's cruel and unusual punishment provisions. That's what we have. So it's not only the speech and debate clauses, but Congress has passed a statute to further their oversight responsibilities. And that was happening in this particular case.
Yes, I want to go over to also another thing, because the comment that Dennis made regarding who's likely to win the midterms. So I want to also posit another scenario for both of you to respond to. I heard yesterday on a podcast that had Andrew McCabe, and Andrew McCabe was speculating that what might happen. And he said we should be aware of it. He didn't predict it would. He just said it might. There's a possibility that what Trump might do is give Maduro some money, send him to some location he wants to live and retire in relative comfort, in return for a letter acknowledging Venezuela interfered with the 2020 election. So why am I bringing this up? Because we also had the FBI, right, go into Fulton County and take possessions of machines. So here's another scenario that, again, I'm positing is not likely, not probable, but possible. And again, what we've established with Trump, anything is possible. So, you have to have a very vivid imagination. So what if we already know that he had a strategy to revoke the 2020 election, right? He had the fake electors. He was going to replace the fake electors and have basically, Pence go up and either validate the fake electors, or I don't know what the other thing was, but, either Pence was going to declare Trump the winner because because they were going to remove the real electors and replace them with the fake electors. It's not all completely clear to me on what their end goal, but I mean, what they were going to do, but their end goal was to return Trump to the White House and basically say Biden was not legitimately elected. So that's what he did in 2020. You got to assume now in 2024 and by 2026, he's going to be a lot smarter than he was in 2020. So, he's had 6 years to ponder all this, to plan, to strategize over this. And he's not a stupid person. He understands what potentially could be the consequences to him, not only to him, his whole family, because we have all these, because they might investigate, Eric and Don Jr. the same way Hunter was investigated for all these deals that they're doing and all these foreign transactions. So I got to assume he's aware of all this stuff and understands that he probably doesn't want to subject the whole family to having all their records opened up and having Eric and Don Jr. being subpoenaed by Congress and then maybe refusing to come the same way Hunter was forced to come, or they were going to hold him in contempt and put him in jail. You can imagine now having this happen to not only him, but his whole family and their whole business. And then they'd have to disclose all these deals with UAE and Saudi Arabia and everything else. So now what happens? What happens if he goes into all these locations, takes the machines, and then tells his people, we still control this House and the Senate. We're not going to certify. We're just not going to seat these people. We're going to say they lost, okay? And I still have a majority. Okay. I don't think, am I saying that's a probability? I'm not saying it is, but am I saying it's impossible? No, I'm not. I think it's possible, of what we know what he did to stay in the White House. We know he's smarter now than he was then. We know he has more power now than he had then. Okay. And so I don't think he's just going to, and he's taking these machines over. He's doing all this stuff because he's thinking through, the consequences of what happens if he loses in 2026. So, Dennis, Bruce, what's your reaction to this speculation?
Well, let me try that first, because
Go ahead.
I remember the election in 2000, the election in 2004, where there were disputes in each election about the Electoral College. In 2000, the fight in Florida over the so-called hanging chads made it pretty clear that the election was stolen from Gore. Gore, despite the pleadings of a number of us, did not want to fight it. He felt that he had gone as far as he could and didn't want to go any farther. He did not want a challenge to be made when the results of the Electoral College go over to the House of Representatives and have to be certified by the House. But some of us in the House, myself and Stephanie Tubbs Jones, insisted on going forward to challenge the outcome of in the Electoral College. We voted no. Now, in 2026, if Trump is not going to be able to change the result of congressional elections. You can only, if there was some procedure, at this point, some extra legal or extra constitutional procedure. Let me back up. Bruce, you may be able to answer this. I don't see any way possible you can reconstruct in the Electoral College the results of the 2020 election, if they tried to kick it into a Congress that was new in 2026, it's not going to happen at all. There won't be any effective challenge. They just don't have the votes. So I don't know. I mean, there's all kinds of fantasies that are running around here. You can play endless permutations. The bottom line is the Democrats are likely to take back the House. They could have an outside shot at the Senate. That's going to have consequences for Trump, and regardless of what he thinks happened in 2020. And finally, if he wanted to argue that he won the election in 2020, the other argument could be, okay, you're termed out.
Yeah, my point is this. So when you, Bruce, in responding to what Dennis had to say, I'd like to add one more thing for you to think about as you're responding to what Dennis had to say. What if the reason why he wants to validate that he probably won 2020 by getting this statement is that's the pretext he can use to go in and take all the machines and validate the federal branch takeover of the process by saying, look, Democrats did this to me in 2020. They got away with it in 2020. We can't let them get away with it in 2026. And I'm the only one who can stop this, so I got to do my thing. And, you should support me because, everyone else is a rhino. And so the Democrats are trying to steal things like that's all they do is steal. So I'm not, the point is not just to satisfy his ego that he won 2020. The point might be is to discredit an outcome of 2026 based upon somebody providing more credible evidence. Not that I say Maduro signing a document swearing to it should be credible, but many people those who believe him will view it as credible if it happens. So I'm just posing scenarios out here under which he could have a basis for saying, look what happened in 2020. I need to do this in 2026, and maybe the Supreme Court would go along with that. I mean, as they've gone along with many things they should have never got along with. So, Bruce,
I think that it's very unlikely that Trump could make any credible claim that 2020 was stolen. When they did recounts in many states 3 or 4 times, these were conservative states. They came up with even bigger Biden victories than otherwise. I think more in the handful of votes that were illegal, as many voted for Trump as for Biden. There's just nothing there. You can go in and look at the machines unless, and they got to worry about a John Dean saying, wait a minute, we went in and we fiddled and broke in the machines and we're the ones who committed fraud. So I don't think that there's any plausibility that there'll be any evidence that shows 2020 was compromised. We remember that Trump and his allies brought 61 cases after 2020, challenging votes. 61 cases. He lost every single one. And when Rudy Giuliani went before one court in Pennsylvania, they asked him, you have any evidence of fraud? He says, no, we're not alleging fraud, right? I just think he could make it up. Hey, like he asked the Georgia Secretary of State, just invent 11,700 votes so I can win.
That's a very important point because Brad Raffensperger, who's now running for governor in Georgia, held the line as to his responsibilities as Secretary of State. Yeah. And he had extra pressure on him to make sure that the results, as they were reported out of Georgia, were correct. And the fact that the administration is returning to Georgia to check again, I think is somewhat due to the fact that Raffensperger did not cooperate with Trump's request to basically come up with 11,000 votes so that Trump could claim that state. So I think, Bruce, what you said is spot on.
Yeah. And Georgia was one of the states that did recounts, didn't change anything, it did samples. So I think that they're going there because I think they have to just do things that create optics that satisfy their base, mega base or whatever. Oh, there must be something there because the FBI, and even again, think of the strangeness. Tulsi Gabbard is with the FBI. Tulsi Gabbard's the director of national intelligence. What the heck is now? The director of national intelligence now is out and investigates criminal activity. The whole thing is completely bizarre. I think that's because Tulsi Gabbard is on the outer fringe of Trump mania, and so she's got to find something to do. So she's got time to accompany the FBI on this fishing expedition.
I would doubt very seriously that she did that on her own initiative.
Yeah,
I think she was asked to go there from somebody up above, and she complied because there was a disjuncture, let's say, between the responsibilities of her office and her presence at the in that voting issue.
Yeah. Let me just finish here. I think that what I believe, Jeffrey and Dennis, that a more plausible and even, but I would say alarming scenario is that as the voting for 2026 approaches, that Trump will invoke the Insurrection Act and make some kind of excuse as to why we can't have the elections at all. Now, whether I think he certainly would flirt with that idea, whether he, and we know that he's trying to change and overhaul, the Defense Department in a way that would have members follow clearly illegal orders. And that's what I think is more probable than that he'll try to stuff the ballot box. But he may, but if there's pushback, he won't do that. I think he's shown that he's weak, that as long as there's a strong voice against him, as he backed down on Greenland, he backed down on Iran, he's backed down, with regards to castigating fighting in Afghanistan. He's backed down at least initially a little bit in Minneapolis and Minnesota, moving Bovino. I think that that's that we can tell about Trump is that if you stand up and say no, he backs away.
But what we have described here, in the last hour, is that we are in a constitutional crisis right now.
Yeah.
And that crisis can only be successfully resolved if the Congress of the United States stands up for the people who sent them to Congress to be collectively a co-equal branch of government. So I'm going to have to drop off the call, but I just have to say that this discussion today relates to the seriousness of the moment that we're in as a nation. And what you just said, Bruce, about the possibility that that Insurrection Act card could be played when, in fact, it attempts to override not just the will of the people, but the First Amendment rights of the people. We're in uncharted waters right now, and only if Congress defends the Constitution, as I took an oath 8 times to do over 16 years. That's the test of whether they will stand up whether they stand by their oath and stand up for the American people. Thanks, Jeffrey, and thanks, Bruce. We'll talk to you.
Thank you,
Dennis. I would close with these words, and in Congress, I think we're back with Abe Lincoln. We are confronted with either nobly saving or meanly losing the last best hope on earth. It's Abe Lincoln, and I think we are exactly there.
House divided, right?
House
divided against itself, cannot stand, and we need to hearken to that underlying sense of unity, which still binds us as a nation, to make sure that it's not rended and that a single person who feels untethered to the Constitution, the person who happens to be president, is not permitted to tear the country apart. So thanks, everyone, and we'll talk soon. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Dennis. Okay, Bruce, I would like to let me see if let me remove Dennis here. There we go. So I'd like to elaborate. One is I'd like to explain why I bring these points up. One is I like to say I always take things from the perspective of someone who's an investor, who's made his money investing, and has always thought about all the things that can go wrong. So that's part of my risk management mentality, is I try and think through things that can go wrong, and I like to think about everything that can go wrong that I'm capable of thinking of. But I also want to make another point with respect. A number of years ago, one of my close friends and business partners came to me with an investment proposition, and anything he looked at, I was inclined to invest with. But this was a bigger sum of money, so I wanted to do my own due diligence. So I met the person that where this investment proposition came, and I thought the person was felonious. So that was the impression I had of this person. So I went back and spoke to my friend. I said, I think this guy is felonious. I don't want to invest. And so my friend said, don't worry, I don't trust him either, but I put all these checks and balances and controls and all this type of other stuff to make sure that he can't get away with doing anything that would be damaging. So I said, look, this is what I believe. Okay, you're older than me, you're more experienced than me. I'm sure you're wiser than me. But this is to the extent that I say all of that, this is my wisdom. Okay, he thinks like a felon. I don't, and you don't. He'll think of things we'll never think about because our mind doesn't work that way. So I'm not a profiler. I can't put myself in his mind and come up with all the things he's going to come up with, and neither can you. So as much as you think you can do to keep him in a box, he's going to figure out a way out of that box because it's going to be something he's going to think about that you didn't consider, okay, or I didn't consider. So the best thing to do, and this was somebody who I respected a lot. I basically almost did everything this person told me, but this time I did my due diligence. I just said, I'm staying away from this deal because as much as I trust you, okay, I think you're underestimating his skill to outsmart you in in these circumstances. And what happened was, yes, my friend got outsmarted, and they ended up putting the guy in jail, but they got no money back. So the guy found the loophole. So this is my concern. This is a little bit of wisdom I'm trying to impart. Is who, when it comes to felonious acts, Trump's going to outthink you and outthink me. He's going to outthink the Constitution. He's going to outthink. Doesn't mean he's going to the end. He's going to do it. He's going to get away with it. We should just understand that when it comes to thinking like a felon, you and I can't think like a felon the way he can. Whatever we try and put him into a box, he's going to try to figure out a way to get out of that box, and he'll think of ways you and I never considered. So
that's true, Jeffrey. But also, I go back. Richard III had that same mentality, and he ended up a horse, a kingdom for a horse, right?
Yes.
So even these people who are great felons sometimes end up being held accountable. Sometimes not. I mean, history is flukish on that score. So it's not a guaranteed thing. And what's going in, and Trump knows that if he just went away, he can live a comfortable life. He's got money. He doesn't really have anything else because he has no philosophical anchor to himself. That's why he's an insomniac, and finds life nothing more than a series of efforts to belittle and harm and be cruel to other people. But he may survive, with that kind of attitude. But at least at present, from my regular conversations on Capitol Hill, I'm more optimistic than I have been in the last 6 months that the center will hold, that the murders out in Minneapolis have really changed the dynamic in the Congress of the United States, and I think the American people too. And you see that in Trump backing down and getting rid of Bovino, sending Tom Homan there. There'll still be some clashes, and Trump is going to push. You're exactly right. He's a felon, so he's going to push and see how far can he come back again, and push and push and push. But I think the videos, it's what I analogies are always imperfect, but it reminds me of the water hoses and the cattle prods down in Selma, Alabama in 1964. That was that brought forth the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Those images were indelible. Little kids being brutalized, the 16th Street Baptist Church, the little girls being blown up. I think that just, and the tenacity of racism in the South was very strong too. Jim Crow fell very quickly. And I think, and I'm hopeful that that's what we're seeing right now, but it's not inevitable. It's up to us. It's not going to happen by spontaneous combustion.
Yeah. Now I think it would be negligent on my part if I didn't now go back to something mentioned by both you and Dennis, is the Epstein files. I can tell you my problem talking about it. My problem talking about it and reading what I haven't read all the files. I've read some of them, but what I've read is so disgusting. I don't have I don't have an adequate vocabulary to describe how disgusting it is if true. I mean, it left me speechless. And again, I'm not saying that it all was true. If it is true, I just was left speechless. So now my question is though, given the fact that it was my emotional reaction, to what I read, it just really left me really speechless. Um, the depravity, really. I mean, it's just not a vocabulary just sufficient to really describe, you know, what is described in the files. Again, which might not be true. So, but if it's true, it's true. It's horrifying. Um, what is disgusting to me is that there's been no indication of what actually was investigated. So what was I mean, one is the fact that some things are not released because supposedly national security issues are. I mean, for the government to release all this stuff and basically then tell us what we heard from, the way I read it, and it's my impression of the language that Trump has used and the other people who have discussed this. Um, Blanche or whatever, is that his name? The
Todd Blanche, the Deputy Attorney General. Yeah.
Yes, they basically said this is all a hoax. I mean, everything that we read is all a hoax. So I don't know if they've ever done any serious investigation to determine it's a hoax, but they said there's nothing even worth investigating. So if all this stuff was released and they're asserting nothing is worth investigating, the consequences of that statement is basically saying everything you read is a hoax. So, I mean,
And why would there be these millions of pages that were all just concocted? They don't have the government officials didn't have anything better else to do than this is over long years. It wasn't just a hoax, over one weekend or something of that sort. Why are all these files so voluminous then, if there's nothing there? And moreover, if it was a hoax, why didn't you release it long ago and expose it, and remove clouds over all these prominent people's heads?
I mean, it's easy. It's like when I saw like Elon Musk say, when some people were saying, when he was saying fake news, fake media, look out, they're attacking me. Look at the emails. I mean, from the little bit of the emails I saw, which I read over a couple of year period of time, is that there was an effort by Musk and Epstein to get together. So it apparently didn't. It seems like it didn't happen, but the emails seem to reflect the fact that there was enthusiasm, even on Musk's part, to do something. So it's very interesting how so many people, if there was nothing there, if it was all a hoax, if it's been proven to be all a hoax, why are so many people saying, I really didn't know this guy, I barely spoke with him, never went to the island, I bumped into him on the street, I wouldn't recognize him. I mean, no, nobody's coming out and saying, yeah, the guy did nothing wrong, this is all a hoax. And I'm proud of my relationship with him. So this is the thing. If he did nothing wrong, if all this is a hoax, why is nobody willing to say it's all a hoax? And yeah, I'm proud of my relationship with him. Yeah. So how can you have it both ways? That people are running away from ever knowing this guy, from ever hanging out with him, from ever doing anything with him? If every one of these accusations are false and it's all a hoax, then why are they running away with him? I mean, clearly it doesn't make sense, and so how could anyone read this and then hear Blanche say there's nothing there, there's a hoax, and people say, okay, let's move on to another issue. I mean, this is appalling.
Yeah. And then moreover, number one, they do have some of the videos. I mean, the video of Andrew there, on his hands and knees. We don't need to be graphic about it. Over a woman, although she was clothed, at least at that time. But the other thing that seems to me utterly ridiculous, Jeffrey, and, we're males, and we know what a large portion of the male species craves, having sex, and they get their adrenaline high out of, maybe for some, even have sex with underage women. So, and it's not just the Epstein files. We read virtually daily in the newspapers, the sexual harassment, and whether it's in the military or whether it's in Hollywood or Harvey Weinstein or whatever. So the idea that none of these people, these males there, and knowing just the reputation of Jeffrey Epstein with underage women, wouldn't know in advance, hey, this is what our opportunity is, and even being tempted by it. It doesn't exist. I mean, are these all choir boys out there? There are some choir boys, but you can count them on your hands with fingers left over. And most of the males, unfortunately, I'm part of the species, but I don't really applaud the lust and the male chauvinism, the misogyny out there that's very pervasive. And so it all fits into what we know about human nature. And you're trying to defy you're trying to suggest, that's really not how males operate in general, having this incentive, sexual appetite. It's ridiculous. And that's what makes these claims so hollow. Oh, I never really was tempted to go there. And now I regret Jeffrey Epstein. You didn't regret Jeffrey Epstein when you thought you had a chance to sleep with women that you wanted to sleep with. It was only afterwards that you got disappointed. And it's the story told over and over and over again. And I think that the males are just in denial because they know their ulterior motives are very repugnant, and so come up with these stories. But their credibility is certainly very, very tiny.
Yeah, so I mean, I see Massey is still pushing this, and I guess other people as well, saying it's not over as much as Trump and his administration wants it to be over.
Yeah.
But they want to basically see how much they need to release it, and then continue to insist that there's nothing really there. These are all allegations that have never been proven, and we don't know to what extent they were ever investigated, how diligently they were investigated, and then there's some concerns about what happened to the people who have claimed, and I guess a few were under oath, that their lives were threatened. So what do you do to make somebody feel comfortable when people who seem to be able to get away with anything tell you that you're if you say anything against me, you're going to end up 6 feet under. So
and the other thing
that should be frightening to people. I mean, I don't know what the FBI does to try and make people feel safe. That and the question is, let's assume for the sake of it is true. Might be true, might not be true. But if you who really, I mean, posit this, okay? Consider this, okay? Kash Patel coming up to you and say, don't worry, if you got a lot of stuff on Trump and it's real and you show it to me, I'm going to protect you. Who really would rely upon a Kash Patel guarantee? Who?
Yeah, and we know that.
Tell me, really, would you rely upon? Yes, Kash Patel is going to protect you from Trump because he proposed rule of law in your interest before Trump's interest. Who in this administration, in this type of position, would say they're going to choose rule of law and truth to their fidelity to Trump? So obviously, whoever feels threatened, they're not going to confide with the Kash Patel.
Yeah.
Do you think is that an unreasonable statement?
No, it's not, and I think it's even more reasonable than on first blush, because everybody knows with any sophistication that in the justice system is clearly influenced by power. You are a celebrity and you have money. You have a huge advantage. Now it doesn't always win, but it wins most of the time. I mean, Mark Rich, you get pardons and you get favors and everything else under the sun if you have a huge amount of money. And so if you're not somebody who's a celebrity and you don't have money, the odds are stacked against you. And it's very, very seldom that you're able to have be vindicated in court. And the other element that comes into play, and just thinking about what happened, because you can have a political setback, even if it falls short of criminality. And the fact is that just because they may say that they didn't commit a crime that you could prove beyond a reasonable doubt doesn't mean that they did things that, to somebody who's supposed to be a role model, are utterly repugnant, and you would never want a decent role model to do those kinds of things. And yet these are the elite people that are supposed to be the examples for youth. I mean, that's really, really quite alarming. And I'm sure there are others that may have fallen under the rug and not been disclosed quite yet. But this is this, I think, is an earmark of the decay of our culture. If you read back, I mean, I always try to go back to 1776 or 1787. Do you think James Madison and Thomas Jefferson would be visiting a Jeffrey Epstein, a George Washington? I mean, it's inconceivable, right? That's how they would spend their leisure time. And that shows that, the decay that has set in to our society, and it finds expression in different ways as well. But that's something that needs to change by example, and it needs to start with the leadership.
Yeah, but this is really, I mean, it's going back to the point that I think you raised earlier. I'm not sure if you or Dennis did, but I think you did. Some things were claimed national security issues, which meant they had to do with something that had to do with her. So let's assume, we're not saying it's a fact, let's assume that some of it's not released because some people, might have been, let's say, Mossad, Israel, so just as a reasonable guess, okay, just a guess. Shouldn't we know if anyone is compromised?
Absolutely. Of course we should. They may serve in high office. They may serve as spies. They may do all sorts of things untoward to the United States. So that's why it is important to know against whom there's compromising information, so we can discount their credibility and their honesty accordingly. For sure, this is something that, unfortunately, Jeffrey, I say this reluctantly. I think one reason why there are many in Congress who are reluctant to investigate too deeply is because many members of Congress have skeletons in their closet too. Wilbur Mills, one example, and Fannie Fox or whatever. So they figure, really, we want to go down that road, it's going to come back and haunt us. So that makes them not the ideal ombudsman, if you would, to investigate this stuff, because many of them would like to have that go away because it's going to cast a cloud over their own political fortunes.
That's why it's always good to corrupt both parties, because then they have aligned incentives to make sure that that neither one of them have the incentive to reveal the other if both are implicated. There's an example you give in game theory is if you're kidnapped by somebody and somebody won't pay ransom, and the kidnappers will say, well, you've seen who we are, we don't really want to kill you, but we have to kill you because you can testify against us. Well, the thing to propose to the kidnappers is saying, let me give you evidence of me committing a crime. Mm-hmm. So I won't accuse you because I'm going to go out and murder somebody, and you'll have the evidence that I murdered somebody. So now you'll have the same incentive to not say anything as I will have an incentive to not say anything. Yeah. So that way you get free, but the act of getting free is you have to be a criminal yourself. So they have as much leverage over you as you have on them. So
yeah, I think it's a variation, Jeffrey, of mutual assured destruction.
Right.
And the nuclear strategy, mutual assured destruction. So both sides say, okay, no way, we're not going to go forward. Yeah. Yeah, Jeffrey, I've got to get off in like 5 minutes here.
Okay, so how would you like to end today's conversation, Bruce?
I really want to go back and underscore, the historic moment that we're living in. And sometimes you don't understand history's being made. And to repeat Abe Lincoln, this is the test. History is going to record we either nobly saved or meanly lost the last best hope on earth, all vindicating the sacrifices of our ancestors or just squandering it and really not having history look at us with any great applause. And it may seem melodramatic, but it's not melodramatic. I've never seen anything like this close in my 79 years, right? And say this is the time we have to hang together as citizens without being angry, without being bitter, but the rule of law has to prevail here, and it will if we insist on it. That's what I would say.
Well, thank you very much, Bruce, and I will see you next week.
Okay, thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.